Great. So we need to move on to some questions from people at home. So
Okay.
we'll come over here and get the questions. And go here? Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so the first one, I'll just come over here. So how can the birds fly such long distances? Who wants to answer that one?
Well, I could take that one on. One of the things the birds have to do is put on enough fuel to make this flight. And the fuel that they have will be burnt up in about a day or so. So the fuel is the thing that's really critical to being able to power the flight. The other thing that they do is, as you can see, it's a very windy day here today. This is perfect for migration for these birds because the wind will give them an assistance and speed up the flight so they can make a long distance flight. The third thing they do is they fly at very high elevations. So they'll be up above the mountains, some of them upwards of 10,000 feet, taking advantage of these high elevation winds, and they'll streak across the sky to the next spot in Alaska.
Okay, so the other question is similar to that. They want to know how many times do the birds stop between their wintering grounds and their breeding grounds?
Well, there's about 6 or 7 major stopover sites. They don't always stop at each one. Sometimes if the wind is good, they'll bypass them. But many of them will stop 6, 7, 8 times on the migration.
This one is about energy and food. They want to know what food gives the birds the most energy.
Well, western sandpipers have a variety of things to eat, all very small animals in the mud, but they also feed on the diatom sludge or film on the top of the mud. Both of these things give them a lot of energy, and they have to eat a lot. So on a flight from here to the Stikine River, which is about 900 kilometers, they probably have to burn about 1.5 grams of fat, and it probably takes them 2 or 3 days to build that up.
Wow. So this one is about conservation laws. They want to know, are Canadian laws the same as the U.S. laws for protecting the birds?
Very similar. The Migratory Bird Convention Act, which was signed in 1916 between Canada and the U.S., is still in power, and it's one that protects migratory birds such as these sandpipers in both Canada and the United States. And then there's other laws too. We have provincial laws similar to the state laws in the U.S. And then areas such as this that have been set aside, they have protection under state and in some cases federal legislation as well. So the laws are very, very similar.
Okay, so somebody wants to know when the birds sleep on their journey and where they do it.
Well, birds have an unusual mode of sleeping. And if you look at a bird, you can see that its eye might be open, but the eye on the other side might be closed. And so unlike us, who close both of our eyes and sleep with our whole brain, birds sleep with one half of the brain at one time and the other half at another time. And what makes it more unusual is they sleep for only a few seconds at a time. If you watch a bird sitting there, and a western sandpiper might be out in a roost, one leg tucked up in its feathers, the eye might be open and then it will close for a few seconds, and then the brain is sleeping, doing whatever the brain does when it sleeps. Then that eye will open and the one on the other side will close, and they'll alternate like that. They can probably also sleep while they're flying, and a lot of birds do that.
That'd be real useful for meetings.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, all the people at home, when your teacher says, "Are you awake?" you say, "Oh, half my brain is sleeping."
Yeah.
You don't have that excuse. So this one's from Barber Bush Elementary in Texas. Alexis wants to know, what happens to the baby birds when the adults leave them?
Well, the young birds up in Alaska are left alone, and the adults migrate south through here in July. The young come on their own. They depart Alaska sometime in late July and into August, and so we'll see all of the young ones coming on their own. They have some instinctive ability to know which way to go because they come through the same migration routes. The amazing thing is that some of these birds, some of the young ones, some of the adults, will cross the continent. So they're not just here on the Pacific coast. Some of them that we've marked here have been seen in Kansas, and from Kansas they go on down to the Everglades. So it's an amazing migration. These birds have never done it before in their lives, but they seem to know which way to go.
It's incredible. So this one also from Barber Bush Elementary in Texas. What birds attack the shorebirds?
Well, they have a wide variety of predators, mostly other bigger birds, various hawks, and especially falcons. And yesterday, and also this morning, we saw a number of attacks by peregrines, as one of our students here mentioned. And peregrines are very dangerous for small shorebirds.
Great, so this one's from Barber Bush Elementary in Texas as well. Kimberly wants to know, what did you study to be able to work with birds?
Why don't you take that one, Rob?
Okay. After finishing my high school, I went to university, to Simon Fraser University, where Ron and I did our undergrad, and I went on to the University of British Columbia for a PhD. Studied herons, actually, there at University of British Columbia. So I got my academic training at the local universities, and I was fortunate to pick up a job with the Canadian Wildlife Service partway through that because of the field work that I'd done, and I was just one of the fortunate few.
There goes the marsh hawk. Yeah.
Oh yeah, a harrier
Right
just
behind
went
us.
right by.
That's great. Okay, so we'll take a question here from the kids.
It's a little bit different from yesterday. Besides the actual size and on the wings, is there anything else on the bird that you can use to tell if they are a baby or an adult?
Did you hear the question?
I didn't hear the question.
She wants to know whether there's some way with their plumage or any other characteristic that you can tell the age of the bird.
Well, yeah, in western sandpipers, the babies grew their feathers in Alaska, of course. They were like all other birds with down. Then they shed that down and grow feathers. And there's differences in the coloration of the feathers and some of the color marks, and of course how new the feathers are. So adult western sandpipers, when they're coming back here, they're flying on flight feathers that they grew in Panama the year before. So they flew to Alaska, and then they're on their way back. So that feather has got 15,000 kilometers worth of wear on it. It's like the tires on your car. When they've been on there for a while, they wear and you can tell. But a bird that was born that summer has a new feather, and you can see that with a little bit of experience, clear as day. So if we got a bird in hand, we could tell right away.
Okay, so this question from Barbara Bush Elementary from Juan. He wants to know, do you share information with other biologists from Panama all the way to Alaska?
Yeah, we have an extensive network of people working on western sandpipers. It's called the Western Sandpiper Research Network, and we share a lot of info between all of us. Good question, Juan.
You want to take one minute?
I'm kind of curious because there's a lot of birds out there on the beach. When they're feeding, do they actually fight each other for the right to eat, or do they just work together?
Okay. They don't seem to compete very much. They keep a distance from one another, and they move around sort of together. You see a little bit of bumping and things going on occasionally, but they generally just keep away from one another. And I think it's just a matter of just keeping their distance. Everybody, we all feel there's a comfortable distance too, and they all just do the same thing.
Okay, so this one from Barbara Bush Elementary. Jarvis wants to know, what happens to birds if they meet with bad storms during their flights?
Oh, it's a good question. We have actually seen large numbers of birds along the coast in British Columbia down on the rocks during a very, very strong westerly wind, which is a headwind. It stops them from migrating. And as soon as that wind shifted and became a southeasterly like this one we're seeing here today, all of those birds picked up, and we saw about 100,000 of these birds lift, and off they went. So it's really important for them to get this right. The fortunate thing here is that with this kind of storm coming in here regularly every spring, we will see large numbers of birds moving on. There's big flocks out here now that are just gathering in on the mudflat as the wind is picking up. You can see them over on the horizon there, just getting ready to migrate. And we heard some this morning actually calling. There's a special call they give, and off they went in this wind. And this wind will probably blow for another 24 hours or so and carry them to the next site. Good question.
Okay, Lynn, another one?
Okay, I'm just kind of
Watching
curious
her.
because I've heard this happens with other animals, but do birds see colors like we do?
Yes, and in fact, recently there's been a lot of interest in color vision in birds, and it turns out that not only do many of them see as well as we do, they see other colors that we don't see in the UV, the ultraviolet end of the spectrum. So we've all heard about before how good the vision is of things like eagles and falcons, but they're also very, very good at seeing lots of colors. So they have very, very good eyes. Yeah.
Okay, so the next one asks, when do the birds know when to stop and rest during their journey?
That's a very good question. We really don't know when that happens. They're trying, of course, to get to the next mudflat, and it probably has something again to do with the winds. If the conditions are good, they still have lots of fuel, then they will keep flying. But we really don't know what causes them to stop, other than they do.
And they also want to know, has global warming had any effect on the area or on bird migration?
We've actually looked at this with some of our research, and it appears that the global warming effects on the wind will have a small effect on the birds, but the big one will be if there's any sea level rise. As you can see, the tide is right up here now on the high tide, continues to rise, then this beach will become narrower, and it'll be a not as favorable place for them to feed. And that will be found all down the Pacific coast, of course. So we should probably see some pretty big changes in the next 20, 30 years or so.
And if I could add,
Yep.
global warming is going to have the biggest effects in the Arctic, where of course these birds breed, and it's going to have big changes on changing habitats and shifting places where they could breed. And those kinds of things that might happen there we can just try and anticipate. We don't understand any of those things yet.
I'm gonna take one more. Last question.
And yesterday we had the chance of finding a sand sculpin and some other things, and I was wondering, do the seabirds, the shorebirds, eat the sand sculpins?
No, they don't eat the fish. They're just feeding on the tiny invertebrates, the little worms and things that are in the mud.